My name is Elena. For 43 years I believed my life was a testament to loyalty, a long, arduous pilgrimage built on a foundation of love and duty. The man I married, David, was my world. He was charming, with a smile that could light up a room and eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in it. We met in our mid-20s, a pairing that felt comfortable and right. There was no grand, sweeping romance, but a steady, warm affection that I mistook for a love strong enough to withstand anything. It did not withstand the car accident that shattered his spine 6 years into our marriage. The phone call that day is a blur of panic and white noise. I had just returned from a business trip, cutting it short by a day to surprise him. The image of him in that hospital bed, pale and broken, his legs forever still beneath the stark white sheet, is seared into my memory. The doctor's words, "He'll never walk again," echoed in the sterile room, each syllable a hammer blow to my future. In that moment, a devastating guilt consumed me. He was on his way to the airport to pick me up, I was sure of it. My early return had caused this. This belief became the cornerstone of the next 4 decades of my life. I quit my promising career to care for him full-time. When his medical bills mounted, I took on 2, then 3 jobs, working until my body screamed in protest, until my own health began to fray at the edges. I did it all without complaint, fueled by a desperate need to atone for a tragedy I believed was my fault. David, in his wheelchair, became the center of my universe. He was often moody, prone to fits of despair that I met with endless patience. He spoke often of the woman who had saved him, a young nurse named Clara who had been passing by and, according to him, pried the jammed car door open with her bare hands. "She's my guardian angel, Elena," he'd say, his eyes glistening with a gratitude that, in hindsight, looked more like longing. "We must always be grateful to her." And I was. I gave him large sums of money to pass on to her as a reward. I bought her expensive gifts. I welcomed her into our home, this savior, who seemed to understand my husband's emotional needs in a way I sometimes couldn't. She would whisper to me, "Elena, as a sister, let me advise you. A man in his state needs to feel in control. You should give him your savings to manage. It will restore his dignity." I, the fool, thought she was wise. David passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. I was bereft, my purpose gone. The grief was a physical weight, but it was nothing compared to the earthquake that came a week later. I was served with an eviction notice. The house I had slaved to maintain, the home I shared with David for over 40 years, was no longer mine. A will, a recent and cruel document, left every asset, every investment, every penny to Clara. I was thrown out onto the street, a frail old woman leaning on a cane, my body trembling not just with age but with a disbelief so profound it felt like madness. I went to a law firm, my last shred of hope clinging to the title of wife. The lawyer, a young man with a pitying expression, informed me that David had quietly filed for divorce just days before the accident. Our marriage, the entire edifice of my life, had been a legal fiction for decades. Before the nausea could subside, Clara came to see me. She stood before me, smug and victorious, her face untouched by the years of labor that had aged me prematurely. "You never knew, did you?" she sneered, her voice like silk wrapped around a dagger. "David was always worried about my well-being. Not only did he get me that high-paying job at his firm, but he transferred all your salary over the years and every cent he had to me back then. The reason he never wanted children with you? We already had a son. And you stupid woman, even paid to raise him. So, thank you for that." The world tilted. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every aching muscle, it had all been a lie. I had funded my own betrayal. A white-hot rage filled me and I raised a shaking hand, but I was weak, old. Claire was younger, stronger. She grabbed my thin hair, her nails scratching deep furrows into my cheek. The pain was sharp, the humiliation complete. The final blow came not long after. Her son, the boy I had unknowingly helped raise, a hulking young man with David's eyes and Clara's cruel smile, hired thugs. I was shoved into a coarse sack, the world going dark. The blows came fast and hard, a storm of fists and feet breaking my brittle bones. I heard his voice, young and vicious, as I choked on my own blood. "She's just a useless old hag. Beating her to death is doing the world a favor." Then nothing. I expected an afterlife, a judgment. Instead, I felt the crisp starch of hospital sheets. I heard the beep of a monitor. I smelled antiseptic. My eyes flew open. The pain was gone. My body, which had felt like a ruined shell moments before, was whole if tired. I was lying in a chair next to a hospital bed. In the bed lay David. But this was not the old man I had buried. This was the David of 47 years ago, his face young, though etched with a fresh despair. His legs were encased in new plaster. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking, red-rimmed eyes meeting mine. "The doctor says I'll never walk again. What am I supposed to do? I won't be able to find a job." The words were the same. The scene was identical. But I was different. The Elena of before had felt a wave of protective, guilty love. This Elena, the one who had been beaten to death in a sack, felt only a cold, crystallized hatred. Silently, I slipped the bank card I had been about to give him back into my pocket. I let out a soft, cold laugh. "What do you think you should do?" I said, my voice steady as stone. "Just wait to starve." His head snapped toward me, confusion and hurt warring in his handsome features. Those deep-set, expressive eyes that had once made me feel cherished now looked like the tools of a master manipulator. He could make a dog feel like the center of the universe. "What did you say?" he stammered. "Don't worry," I added, the sarcasm biting. "Clara has a great job and so do you. She can support you just fine. You're talented, right? Just pick up a couple more side jobs. You'll survive. What matters most now is staying in a good mood. That's the only way you'll recover faster." As if on cue, the door opened and Clara walked in. She was young, beautiful, her face a mask of gentle concern. In my first life I'd been too distraught to see it, but now it was blindingly obvious. The way she looked at him, the subtle familiarity in her touch as she adjusted his pillow. This was not the first meeting of a stranger and her victim. David, flustered by my reaction, glanced at her. A silent communication passed between them. Clara immediately understood her cue. She came over to me, linking her arm with mine and pulling me aside, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Elena, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I see you like an older sister and I want to give you some advice. Men have their pride, and now that David is in this state he'll have a hard time finding a job. Of course he'll feel like he's lost his dignity. As a woman, I think you should be more understanding and give him a sense of security, like maybe handing over your savings to him." The script was the same. Word for word. The audacity of it made my blood sing with a need for vengeance. This time the play would have a different ending. I was no longer an actress following their directions. I was the director now. And the first act of my revenge was about to begin. The silence in the hospital room was thick enough to choke on. David stared at me, his expression a shifting canvas of hurt, confusion, and a dawning anger. He was waiting for the old Elena, the compliant, guilt-ridden Elena, to rush to his side, to pledge her undying support, to hand over the financial reins without a second thought. That woman was dead. I had felt her die in a sack, beaten by thugs. Clara hovered by his bedside, her presence a constant, irritating hum. She played her part perfectly, the selfless savior, but I could now see the calculation in her eyes. She was assessing me, trying to figure out why her carefully laid script was going off the rails. "Anyway," David said, breaking the silence with a sigh that was meant to sound pathetic but came off as petulant. "Clara is the one who saved my life. She saved my life. You should at least show some appreciation, right? You probably didn't prepare a gift, so why don't you give her a big red envelope instead?" He looked at me expectantly. In my previous life, this was the moment I'd open my purse and handed over 30,000 yuan without a blink, convinced that no amount of money could ever repay such a debt. "That's really not necessary," Clara demurred, waving her hands in a show of modesty that made me want to retch. "No, this is a must. Take it." "It's only right," David insisted, his gaze fixed on me, demanding compliance. This time I didn't move. A frown creased David's brow. Frustrated by my uncharacteristic hesitation, he reached impatiently for my handbag, which lay on the bedside table. He knew my bank card password. How many times in my first life had he secretly transferred money to her, silencing my questions with, "She saved my life. How can you be so heartless?" I snatched the bag away before his fingers could touch it. "Sure," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "If thanking her with money is appropriate, I'm willing. But first I have a few questions." David's jaw slackened. Clara's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I turned my full attention to her. "I heard the car door was jammed shut and you pried it open with your bare hands. That's what David told me, I began, watching her closely. But a lot of the details sound off. A flicker of panic crossed her face. In my past life, any query about the accident would send David into a rage, accusing me of being morbid and heartless. I had learned to never ask, terrified of triggering his trauma. Let's talk about this privately later, okay? Clara said quickly, her voice dropping to a whisper. Please don't bring up the accident in front of David. It'll only make him more upset. I'm afraid it'll hurt him emotionally. I let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed in the quiet room. Afraid it'll hurt him? Or afraid we'll catch you two lying? Their faces darkened in perfect unison. What's that supposed to mean? They chimed together. The synchronization was almost impressive. It was the harmony of two people who had been partners in crime for a very long time. A grown man like David couldn't pry open a jammed car door, I continued, stepping closer to her. Yet you, a petite girl, somehow did it. You don't exactly look like the muscular type. And if you really forced the door open, your hands should be a mess of bruises and cuts. But your injuries. I gestured to the minor scratches on her arms. They look more like they were self-inflicted. I leaned in, my voice a low, venomous whisper. Also, the accident happened 2 days ago. Why didn't you show up earlier? Why only now? I heard you were in a minor fender bender yourself recently. Isn't that strange? Almost too coincidental. That was it. The dam broke. That's enough. David shouted, his voice shaking with real fury now. He was still young, still quick to lose his temper when cornered. Clara, seeing her opportunity, clung to his arm, her eyes welling with manufactured tears. David, I didn't expect Elena to be so suspicious of me. If she thinks that way, then maybe I should leave. He grabbed her wrist. Don't you dare. He turned his burning gaze back to me. Elena, what the hell is your problem? Who interrogates someone like this? I'm telling you, transfer the money now and apologize to Clara. I gave a soft, mocking laugh. Apologize for what? I only asked a few simple questions. If she's telling the truth, why is she so anxious? Besides, she saved your life, not mine. If anyone should be transferring money, it's you. I knew the truth. He had already been funneling our joint savings to her for years. He was likely broke. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy red of humiliation and rage. He snatched his phone from the nightstand and hurled it at me with all his strength. I sidestepped easily. The phone smashed against the wall behind me, the screen shattering. He didn't even flinch. My legs are ruined and this is how you treat me? What's the point of continuing this marriage? Once I'm discharged, let's get a divorce. Divorce. I repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the air. I saw a flash of smugness in his eyes. He thought he had scared me. He thought the threat of losing him would bring me to heel. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze icy. Didn't we already get divorced? The effect was instantaneous. His face went sheet white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. In my previous life, after his death, when I was thrown out of my home, I dragged my sick body to a lawyer, only to be told that David had filed for divorce a few days before the accident. The decree had been finalized without my knowledge. You're making things up, he finally blustered, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. Elena, are you planning to abandon me now that my legs are ruined? How could you be so heartless? Have you forgotten everything I've done for you? We've been married for 6 years. He was trying a new tactic now. Emotional blackmail. He choked up, tears welling in his eyes. He recounted small, tender moments from our past, the daily routines that had built the facade of a happy marriage. But now every memory was tainted. The anniversary gifts he'd exaggerated the price of so he could buy Clara something better. The errands he'd run after dropping me off just to see her. Clara tried to smooth things over. Elena, please don't make this worse because of me. I know you're probably just worried about the future expenses. It's okay. I didn't save David for money anyway. I ignored her and turned to David. See? She just said herself that she doesn't need the money. So why are you still pushing it? What's wrong? Does money burn your hands? Just then a doctor entered, a welcome interruption. We need to settle the next round of hospitalization fees, he said politely. In truth, David was ready for discharge. But in my first life he had insisted on staying in this expensive private hospital for 2 extra months, claiming he needed the best environment to heal. I now knew the real reason. The hospital was close to Clara's apartment. As soon as the doctor mentioned the fees, David and Clara exchanged a glance. He sighed dramatically. Elena, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, why you've become so stingy, but we can't delay treatment. Just transfer the money to my card. I'll take care of it. The audacity took my breath away. I smiled sweetly at the doctor. I remember he already meets the discharge criteria. Please cancel this room. I'll process his discharge today. David's eyes bulged. Elena, are you trying to kill me? What if my condition gets worse at home? The doctor, a pragmatic man, answered before I could. That won't happen. The critical phase has passed. Going home is no different from staying here. I don't have the money to keep you here any longer, I said firmly to David. If you insist on staying, you'll have to pay for it yourself. Or maybe you can borrow it from her. I pointed at Clara. Didn't she just say she has plenty of money? The looks on their faces were priceless, a mixture of shock and fury. I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, out of the hospital and into the bright, free afternoon. I had work to do. The first crack had appeared in their perfect lie and I was going to hammer it wide open. The moment I left the hospital, the warm sun on my face felt like a baptism. I was free. The weight of a 40-year lie was still there, but it was no longer a burden I carried willingly. It was a weapon I was learning to wield. My first stop was a public phone booth. I couldn't risk using my home phone, not yet. I called a lawyer, a man named Mr. Chin who had a reputation for discretion and tenacity. I laid out the bones of the situation, omitting the fantastical truth of my rebirth. I told him I suspected my husband of long-term infidelity, that he had likely dissipated our marital assets, and that the story surrounding his recent accident was fraudulent. I needed evidence and I needed it fast. The accident scene might still be intact, I said, my voice low and steady. And the car's dash cam. I have a feeling the footage hasn't been erased yet. In my first life, by the time I'd mustered the energy to investigate, the scene had been cleaned, the car scrapped, and any evidence conveniently lost. But now, Clara was still in the hospital herself, nursing her minor, likely self-inflicted injuries. She wouldn't have had time to cover her tracks. Mr. Chin was efficient. He called back within a few hours. His voice was crisp and professional. Mrs. Elena, you were correct. The vehicle hasn't been moved to the scrapyard. I've collected samples, fingerprints, hair, blood. And I managed to recover the dashcam footage. It's quite revealing. I'm sending it to a secure email address now. My hands trembled slightly as I found an internet cafe and logged in. The video file loaded. The quality was grainy but the audio was clear. There was David sitting in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. He was turned toward Clara, who was behind the wheel. He wasn't on his way to the airport to pick me up at all. I've officially divorced Elena, David said, his voice brimming with excitement. After the party tonight, let's go get our marriage license. Clara laughed, a tight, nervous sound. No rush. Better wait until you've transferred all your assets into your name. If your ex-wife finds out, it might get messy. David's face darkened. You always say that. I gave you a car. I even gave you all the savings Elena entrusted to me. And you blew it all on those bad investments. Every time you promise we'll get married. You're not planning to fool me again, are you? How could I? Claire cooed. Then she leaned over and kissed him, a long, deep kiss that made my stomach turn. That single act of false affection was enough to placate him. He reminded her to watch the road, but they were both laughing, messing around, their attention anywhere but on the traffic ahead. The car swerved violently and the screen went black with the sound of crushing metal. So that was the truth. Not a tragic accident born of devotion to me, but a reckless moment of passion in a car with his mistress, just after he had finalized our divorce. The guilt I had carried for a lifetime evaporated, replaced by a cold, clean fury. Mr. Chin, I said when I called him back, my voice eerily calm. I need you to find a child. Their child. Based on the timeline, he should be 3, maybe 4 years old. I gave him a list of neighborhoods and parks that David had frequented in my first life, always on solo therapy outings in his wheelchair. I was sure now that those were visits to his son. Next, I went to a major hospital and underwent a full medical checkup. My body, though tired from the shock of the last few days, was healthy. It hadn't yet been broken by decades of back-breaking labor. After the examination, I went straight to the bank. I moved all my savings into a new private account and placed a freeze on all my assets. David would not get another penny. That night, I went home to the apartment we shared. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was alone. The silence was not empty, it was peaceful. I cooked a simple meal for one, drank a glass of wine, and slept a deep, dreamless sleep in our marital bed, feeling not an ounce of loneliness, only a profound sense of reclaiming my own space. My peace was short-lived. My phone buzzed incessantly. David was calling. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a notification popped up. He had taken to social media. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation. He painted himself as a devoted husband struck down by tragedy, abandoned by his heartless wife now that he was useless. He posted photos of his medical records and a pitiful picture of himself in the wheelchair, tears glistening in his eyes. But he was sloppy. In the reflection of the wheelchair's polished metal armrest, I could clearly see Clara's form. In one shot, if you squinted, you could even see the blur of her leaning in to kiss his cheek. There he was, begging for my return and my money while his lover was right there with him. The comments were a flood of outrage directed at me. How could she? What a monster. He deserves so much better. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. Let him dig his own grave. I blocked his number and his social media accounts. For 2 days I ignored the world, focusing on my plan. But David grew increasingly unhinged, posting daily rants, sharing screenshots proving I had blocked him, accusing me of being guilty and running away. Friends started calling, their voices full of concerned admonishment. Elena, he needs you now. This isn't the time to be stubborn. A wife's duty is to stand by her husband. I didn't respond to any of them. I was waiting. On the third day, Mr. Chin called again. The DNA results were back. A 99.9% match between David and the little boy his investigator had tracked down to a modest apartment in a neighborhood David often visited. Mr. Chin had even managed to get a photo. The boy had David's eyes and Clara's sharp little chin. The storm I had been gathering was about to break. And I was ready to stand in the eye of it. I didn't have to go looking for the confrontation. It came to me. Early on the third morning, the doorbell of my apartment rang insistently, angrily. I opened the door to find David, seated in a wheelchair he'd clearly acquired for maximum dramatic effect. He hadn't come alone. Flanking him were his parents, their faces thunderous. And behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, were my own mother and father. You tell me, David's mother, Beatrice, shrieked the moment she laid eyes on my parents, bypassing me completely. Is this how a wife should treat my son? He's crippled and she goes behind our backs, files for divorce and throws him out like garbage. I couldn't help it. A short, disbelieving laugh escaped me. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Because the Civil Affairs Bureau kept divorce records private, they had no idea I knew the truth. They thought they could bully me into submission with this fabricated story. My father, a gentle man, looked flustered. Beatrice, it's their marriage. We really shouldn't interfere. If it helps, we can offer some compensation. Compensation? Beatrice's eyes lit up with greedy fire. Can compensation fix my son's legs? Can money give him back his life? I stepped forward, placing myself between my parents and her vitriol. Your son's leg injury has nothing to do with me, I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. He was fooling around with another woman when it happened. You liar, she shrieked, her hand flying up as if to strike me. My mother gasped and pulled me back. They had always been afraid of Beatrice's vicious temper. It's the truth, I said calmly. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope Mr. Chin had delivered. I handed her the DNA results first. She scanned the page, her face shifting from fury to confusion to a stubborn denial. This doesn't prove anything. Who knows if you faked this? Feel free to verify it, I said, turning my gaze to David, who had gone pale. Or better yet, we can go to court. I'm sure a judge would be very interested in the dashcam footage too. David's father, Charles, a quieter but equally complicit man, finally spoke. There's no need to air our dirty laundry in public. He sighed, a performance of weary reasonableness. Both of them made mistakes. Let's just sit down and talk about a settlement. My parents looked like they were about to agree, desperate for any peace. I raised my hand. We're not paying a single cent. What do you mean? Beatrice shouted. My son supported you all these years and this is how you repay him? Supported me? I scoffed, the sound harsh in the hallway. I've always worked. I paid for everything. Your son gave all his money to that woman. What part of that is supporting me? Beatrice's face turned a mottled red. Unable to argue, she reverted to her default setting. Public shaming. She stormed toward the front door and flung it open. A few neighbors, attracted by the raised voices, were lingering in the hallway. I'm done talking to her. Beatrice wailed to the audience. Let's see what the neighbors have to say. She launched into a twisted version of events, painting me as a gold digger who had abandoned her invalid husband. The neighbors, a mix of curious and sympathetic, began to murmur. It's just a misunderstanding. He probably still loves her. She should take him back. How can she be so heartless? As the tide of public opinion seemed to turn against me, I saw the distress on my mother's face. She stepped forward. Please, let's talk inside. There's no need for this. Beatrice, emboldened by the crowd, sneered and gave my mother a hard shove. And what were you doing earlier? My mother stumbled back. I caught her, my own fury igniting. But before I could speak, a small, chubby figure pushed through the ring of neighbors. A little boy about 4 years old ran straight to David's wheelchair, wrapped his arms around David's legs and shouted, Daddy, you haven't come to see me in so long. You have to buy me a transformer. The hallway fell into a stunned silence. My parents' faces were a picture of shock and dawning horror. I saw Beatrice and Charles exchange a panicked glance. They knew. They had always known about this grandson. David's face was a mask of pure terror. Beatrice lunged forward. Who's your daddy? You've got the wrong person, kid, she said, grabbing the boy's arm roughly. But the child, confused and angry, yelled, He is my daddy. You crazy old lady, let me go. He sank his teeth into her arm. She cried out and released him. The boy ran back to David and started pounding his fists on David's injured legs. Daddy, say something. Are you not going to be my dad anymore? David, writhing in pain, could no longer keep up the charade. He wrapped his arms around the boy. Stop crying. I'll get it for you later, okay? The admission hung in the air, undeniable. My father's gentle face hardened. So, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What is going on here? Why didn't we know about this grandson? The neighbors were now whispering among themselves, the narrative shifting dramatically. Beatrice stammered, My son is soft-hearted. He found this child on the street. It's not his. I had been waiting for this. I pulled out my phone and showed the digital copy of the DNA test to the nearest neighbor. If he's not his biological child, I said loudly, then why do they share DNA? Beatrice snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes blazing. She pulled me aside, her voice a frantic whisper. Elena, what are you doing? Letting everyone see this. What good does that do for you? Charles joined her, his voice low and pleading. She's right. Family matters should stay within the family. Let's sit down and talk. I looked from their desperate faces to the crowd of now enlightened neighbors. I smiled coldly. Weren't you the ones who insisted on dragging this into the open? Now you're afraid it's gone too far? Sorry, it's too late. The whispers grew louder, now directed at David and his parents. I saw them shrinking under the weight of public scorn. I thought they would slink away in shame. But Beatrice, cornered and humiliated, had one last vicious card to play. Her eyes darted around and then she shouted, Fine. Since you're so heartless, Elena, don't blame us for being unjust. I admit it. My son has an illegitimate child. But that's because, she pointed a bony finger at me, Elena can't have children. The crowd gasped. My mother's face went white with rage. That's a complete lie. Oh really? Beatrice sneered, triumphant. Then tell me this. How come after 6 years of marriage, your daughter still hasn't had a single child? If it's not a problem with her body, then what is it? The murmurs started again. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked back into my apartment. I heard Beatrice's triumphant cry behind me. Look at her. Even she knows she's guilty. I emerged moments later. In my hand was a small, familiar bottle. I raised it and tossed it onto the floor at Beatrice's feet. The pills scattered like tiny, accusing seeds. And I'd say the same to you, I said, my voice icy. Do you even know what kind of person your son really is? Like the fact that he's been secretly feeding me birth control pills every night behind my back. The silence was absolute. I then handed my mother the pharmacy receipts and my medical report, confirming my perfect fertility. The evidence was irrefutable. David had not only cheated and stolen, he had systematically robbed me of the choice of motherhood. The unmasking was complete. The neighbors, now fully on my side, began to voice their disgust. Beatrice and Charles, exposed and defeated, tried to push David's wheelchair away, abandoning him in their haste to escape the shame. They didn't care about him. They only cared about the money and status they could extract from the situation. David sat there alone in the hallway, being hit by his own son, surrounded by the contempt of everyone who had once pitied him. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Elena," he choked out. "I know you're angry. I'm sorry, okay?" But his apology was a hollow echo in the cavern of his betrayal. The show was over. I looked at him, at the pathetic spectacle he had become, and I felt nothing. I closed the door, locking him out of my life for good. The silence inside my apartment after I closed the door was profound. On the other side, I could hear the fading sounds of chaos. The little boy's wails, David's strained attempts to placate him, and the final, disapproving mutters of the neighbors as they dispersed. My parents stood frozen in my living room, their faces pale with shock. The kind, orderly world they believed in had just been ripped apart. "Elena," my mother began, her voice trembling. "That child, the pills, is it all true?" I led them to the sofa and sat them down. "Every word," I said, my voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. I knew I had to tell them the rest. They needed to understand why I could show no mercy. I told them everything. Not as a suspicion but as a memory. I described the 40 years of servitude, the devastating revelation of the will, being thrown out of my own home, and Clara's gloating confession. I spared them no detail of my death. The coarse sack, the brutal blows, the young man's voice cursing me as I died. I told them I had lived it all, and I had woken up here in the past with a chance to set things right. They listened, their hands clutched together, their eyes wide with disbelief that slowly, agonizingly, turned into horrified acceptance. They knew me. They knew I wasn't given to hysterical fantasies. The evidence I had just presented in the hallway corroborated the most unbelievable story they would ever hear. Tears streamed down my mother's face. "Hi, baby," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "What you endured." My father's jaw was set, his usual gentleness replaced by a cold, hard anger. "We will not interfere again," he said, his voice firm. "You do what you must, Elena. We are with you." Their belief was a balm on my wounded soul. I was no longer fighting alone. I didn't have to wait long for the next move. A few days later, I received a formal letter from a lawyer, David's lawyer. He was offering to sign the apartment over to me, no strings attached. It was a complete surrender, and it made me deeply suspicious. David didn't surrender. He manipulated. He asked to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. I agreed, my curiosity piqued. What game was he playing now? When I arrived, he was already there, seated at a corner table. He looked terrible. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, his handsome face gaunt. The wheelchair was gone. He was using crutches which leaned against the wall. The sight gave me a petty flicker of satisfaction. I sat down without a word. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse. "You were reborn too, weren't you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been prepared for begging, for threats, for more lies. I had not been prepared for this. I didn't answer, but my silence was confirmation enough. His eyes welled up with tears. "I had a dream," he whispered, leaning forward. "A long, terrible dream. In it you were so good to me. You gave me everything, tolerated all my bad moods, stayed by my side for decades. But before I died, I left a will. I gave everything to Clara. Because of that, you suffered. You lost everything." He looked genuinely tormented. "That will was forged, Elena. Sophie altered it. I meant to divide the assets fairly between you. It wasn't supposed to all go to her. She changed it." I studied his face, looking for the lie. He seemed sincere. But I had learned that David's sincerity was his most effective weapon. "What are you trying to prove with all this?" I asked, my voice flat. "That you weren't that heartless? That I should give you credit for some decency?" We were married for 6 years, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We may not have been madly in love, but we had feelings. I'm only human. It's not like I never cared about you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Your so-called feelings? You let me carry the guilt for your accident my entire life without once telling me the truth. You let me suffer thinking it was all my fault. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. Were those feelings why I worked 3 jobs, exhausting myself to pay your medical bills, only for you to give the money to another woman? Was that love? Or was it love when you said you needed job security, and I pulled every string to get you a high-paying position, and you turned around and handed that job to Clara? His eyes turned red. She was struggling. Life was so hard for her back then. That's the only reason I did it. Later on, I didn't love her anymore. I never saw her again. You know that. It was true that after the accident, David had become a recluse. But that wasn't out of loyalty to me. It was because his disability had clipped his wings. He was stuck with me, the reliable provider, while Claire got the freedom and the funds. So for decades, I said, my voice dripping with scorn, you gave me your love and pain but gave her the money. If that's what you call love, I'd rather be without it. His story about the forged will might have been true. But it changed nothing. It still required his complicity, his willingness to keep Clara in our lives, to prioritize her comfort over mine until his dying breath. Elena, he began again, a desperate finality in his tone. I held up a hand. I'll be taking back what's mine. As for what you two did, I'm not pursuing criminal charges. But as for you, I don't want you anymore. I don't believe in your love and I never will. This ends here. I stood up, ready to leave this sad, pathetic man to the fate he had chosen. But as I turned, the cafe door burst open. A familiar, shrill voice cut through the quiet air. You promised. You promised you'd buy me an even bigger, more expensive transformer. It was the boy. And with him was Clara. But she wasn't alone. Her arm was linked possessively with that of a man in his late 40s, well-dressed and radiating an air of wealth and authority. He was at least 15 years her senior. David's face drained of all color. He looked from Clara to the man, and then to the boy who was now tugging at the man's sleeve. Clara saw David and froze. Her mask of pleasantry shattered, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. What the hell are you doing here? She hissed at David. The man beside her frowned. Sophie, who is this? He's my uncle, Clara blurted out, shooting a frantic, warning look at David. But the dam had broken. David laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your uncle? He snarled, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. Your uncle's the one who got crippled for you? Your uncle's the one who gave you every penny he had? Your uncle's the one you tricked into having a child with you? Clara rushed over to try and silence him, but David, fueled by a lifetime of betrayal, shoved her away. The man's face turned to stone. So this kid isn't even mine? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Clara stammered, please let me explain. The man didn't wait. He backhanded her across the face, the crack echoing in the silent cafe. You tried to con me, he sneered. Just wait. You're finished. He turned and walked out, leaving Clara humiliated and terrified. She whirled on David, all pretense gone. You piece of garbage, she screamed. You ruined everything. Why don't you just die? He kicked his crutches away. He crashed to the floor, scrambling backward as she advanced on him, her hand raised to strike. People intervened, pulling her away. But the final, crushing blow came from their son. The boy didn't go to his fallen father. Instead, he started kicking David, screaming, "This is all your fault. You owe me a transformer." David lay on the cafe floor, surrounded by staring strangers, being assaulted by his own son, abandoned by his mistress. He looked up and met my eyes across the room. In that moment I saw it. He was still breathing, but the man I had known was gone. His spirit had broken. I turned and walked out, leaving the devil I knew to the hell he had created for himself. The path ahead of me was finally clear. The scene in the cafe became the talk of our neighborhood, and thanks to the wealthy man Clara had tried to deceive much of the city. The man, a property developer named Mr. Gao, had power and a vindictive streak. He made it his mission to ensure Clara's reputation was utterly destroyed. Security footage from the cafe, showing her screaming and attacking David, was leaked online. The story of the two-faced manipulator and her crippled lover went viral in our social circles. I watched from a distance, my life finally becoming my own. I focused on my career, which began to flourish now that I wasn't draining my energy and finances into a black hole of deceit. I spent peaceful evenings with my parents, rebuilding the relationships I had neglected in my previous life. The apartment was officially signed over to me without further argument. David, it seemed, had finally given up. But a quiet life was not what fate or my own thirst for closure had in store. A week after the cafe incident, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David on my doorstep. He wasn't in a wheelchair anymore, but leaning heavily on crutches, his body hunched with a weariness that seemed bone deep. He looked years older. "Elena," he said, his voice a rasp. Can I just talk to you for a minute?" I was about to slam the door when I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't manipulation or anger. It was a hollowed-out desperation. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He hobbled in and sank onto my sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at his hands. "She's gone," he finally said, the words empty. "Clara. She took the boy and left. Mr. Gao, he made things very difficult for her. She blamed me for everything. She said I was a useless cripple who ruined her life." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of genuine self-awareness. "She's right, you know. I did ruin her life. And I ruined yours." He took a shuddering breath. "But she ruined mine first. I was so stupid, Elena. I loved her since we were kids. Thought she felt the same. But I was just a wallet to her. A convenient fool." I remained silent, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. I wouldn't give him absolution. The apartment I was going to buy for us, the money I gave her for investments, it was all a lie. He lost it all. She was just stringing me along until she could find a bigger fish. And she found one in Gao. He laughed, a dry, painful sound. "And I was so blind, I divorced you for her." He was confessing everything, but it felt too little too late. It was the confession of a man who had lost everything, not one who was truly repentant. "What do you want from me, David?" asked my voice cold. "I have nothing," he whispered. "No money. No job. My parents won't speak to me. They're too ashamed. I'm staying in a filthy rented room." He swallowed hard. The things she said to me. The way she looked at me. Like I was vermin. I felt a pang of something, not pity but a grim recognition. This was the consequence of a life built on lies. He was experiencing a fraction of the desolation I had felt when thrown out of my home. "I can't work," he continued, his voice breaking. "My legs, they're not great. I need help, Elena. I have nowhere to go." There was the ask. He had run out of options, and the only person left in his life who had ever shown a shred of decency was the one he had betrayed most deeply. He was looking to me for shelter, for a return to the comfort I had provided for so long. "David," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You made your choice. You chose Clara. You chose to lie, to steal, to manipulate. You have to live with the consequences of that choice." "But I'll die out there," he cried, genuine terror in his eyes. "That is not my responsibility," I said, each word a stone dropped into a still pond. "My responsibility to you ended the moment you filed for divorce behind my back. You are a stranger to me now." The finality in my voice broke the last of his composure. He began to sob, great heaving sobs that racked his thin frame. It was an ugly, pathetic sight. The charming man I had married was gone, replaced by this broken shell. I felt nothing. The well of emotion I had for him had run dry decades ago in another life. After a long while, his sobs subsided into ragged breaths. He struggled to his feet, not meeting my eyes. He shuffled to the door, a picture of utter defeat. "I'm sorry, Elena," he mumbled as he left. "For all of it." I closed the door behind him and locked it. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was definitive. I thought that would be the last I saw of him. I was wrong. The noose continued to tighten around Claire as well. Mr. Gao's vengeance was thorough. He used his influence to have her fired from the job David had secured for her. Landlords, fearing Gao's displeasure, refused to rent to her. She and the boy were forced to move from one seedy motel to another. I heard snippets of this through Mr. Chin, who kept a discreet watch on both of them at my request. I didn't want any more surprises. A few days later I received a visit I truly dreaded. Clara herself came to my door. She looked haggard, her beauty faded under a layer of grime and stress. The boy clung to her leg, whining. "You," she spat, her eyes burning with hatred. "This is all your fault." I almost laughed. "My fault? You made your choices, Clara. If you had just been a good wife and taken care of your husband, none of this would have happened," she screamed, her sanity clearly fraying. "He was mine first. You stole him from me." The delusion was breathtaking. "He was never a prize to be won," I said calmly. "He was a man who made promises to me and broke them for you. Now you both get to live with the aftermath." "I need money," she demanded, her voice shifting to a harsh practicality. "Give me money and I'll disappear. You'll never see me or the boy again." "I wouldn't give you a penny if it meant saving my own life," I replied. "You had all my money once. You squandered it. You get nothing more from me." Her face contorted with rage. She lunged at me, but I was ready this time. I slammed the door in her face, her screams muffled by the thick wood. I heard her pounding on it for a few minutes before she finally gave up, her curses fading as she dragged her son away. The storm was raging around them, but inside my apartment there was peace. I had my home, my health, my career, and my family. I had survived. But the final act of their tragedy was yet to play out. The noose was tight and they were both running out of air. The weeks that followed were a study in the slow public unraveling of two lives. David became a ghost haunting the fringes of our neighborhood. I'd see him sometimes, hobbling on his crutches, his clothes increasingly shabby, haunting the local park or sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. The neighbors who had once pitied him now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a living reminder of a sordid scandal, and his presence made people uncomfortable. He tried to call me a few times from unknown numbers. I would answer, hear his ragged breathing, and hang up. He sent a long, rambling letter full of self-pity and regret, which I burned without finishing. His suffering did not bring me joy, but it did bring a sense of grim equilibrium. The scales were balancing. Clara's descent was faster and more dramatic. Without Mr. Gao's support and blacklisted by his connections, she was unemployable. The money she had siphoned from David was long gone, lost in the bad investments he had mentioned in the dashcam video. She and the boy were evicted from their motel. Rumor had it she was sleeping in her car, a cheap compact that was on its last legs. I kept my distance, focused on my own renewal. I enrolled in a course I'd always wanted to take. I went on hiking trips with friends from work. I was rediscovering the person I was before David, before the accident, before the long gray decades of deception. It was a thrilling, sometimes frightening process. One rainy evening, I was returning from dinner with my parents when I saw a commotion outside a dilapidated apartment building on the poorer side of town. A small crowd had gathered. As I drew closer, I heard a familiar, shrill voice screaming obscenities. It was Claire. She was standing in the pouring rain, drenched and wild-eyed, facing down a burly landlord who was throwing her meager belongings, a few suitcases and a trash bag full of clothes, onto the sidewalk. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I paid you. You paid for last week," the man roared back. "You're 2 weeks behind now. I'm not a charity. Get your trash and get out." And then I saw him. David was there, leaning against the wall of the building, under the scant shelter of a narrow awning. He was just watching, his expression blank as Clara's life was literally thrown out onto the street. Their son, the little boy, was crouched by the curb, crying as his toys were scattered in the puddles. It was a tableau of utter ruin. Clara saw David standing there, passive. Her fury, which had been directed at the landlord, found a new, easier target. "You," she screamed, splashing through the rainwater toward him. "This is all your fault, you useless cripple. Why are you just standing there? Do something." David didn't move. He just looked at her, his eyes dead. "What do you want me to do, Clara?" he asked, his voice flat. "I have nothing. I am nothing. Just like you wanted." His passivity enraged her even more. She slapped him hard across the face. The sound was sharp, even over the drumming rain. The crowd gasped. "Don't you talk back to me," she screeched. "If you had been a real man, none of this would have happened. You couldn't even hold on to your stupid wife." She hit him again and again. David didn't raise a hand to defend himself. He just took it, the blows rocking his frail body on his crutches. It was a horrifying sight. A public beating, a complete annihilation of whatever dignity he had left. The landlord, looking disgusted, went back inside and slammed the door. Most of the crowd, uncomfortable, began to disperse. No one intervened. They were pariahs. It was the boy who finally stopped it. He ran over and started pulling at Clara's arm. "Mommy, stop. Stop hitting Daddy." Clara shoved him away so hard he fell onto the wet pavement. "He's not your daddy," she screamed at the child. "He's nothing. We're nothing because of him." The boy lay in the rain sobbing. David finally stirred. He looked down at his son, then at Clara, who was still raining blows on his shoulders and chest. And something in him seemed to snap. With a strength I didn't know he still possessed, he grabbed her wrists. "Enough," he said, his voice low and guttural. "It's over, Clara. It's all over." He released her and, with immense effort, bent down to pick up his crying son. He tucked the boy under one arm, grabbed his crutch with the other, and began to hobble away down the dark, rain-slicked street, leaving Clara standing amidst the wreckage of her belongings. She stared after them, her body trembling, alone in the downpour. The rage seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. She didn't look like a vengeful mistress anymore. She looked like a lost soul, a woman who had gambled everything and lost. I turned and walked away, the rain masking the tears I didn't realize I was shedding. They weren't tears of pity. They were tears for the utter waste of it all. For the lives that could have been, had they chosen decency over greed. I knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't the end. This level of despair had only one logical conclusion. They had reached the point of no return. A tense quiet settled over the next few days. The gossip about the public beating in the rain spread, but it was hushed, somber. The spectacle had ceased to be entertaining and had become something dark and tragic. David, Clara, and the boy had seemingly vanished. I tried to put them out of my mind. I had a meeting with a client about a major project, a career opportunity that would have been unthinkable in my previous life. As I was preparing, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Chen. "Mrs. Elena," he said, his tone unusually grave. "There's been a development. The police were called to a rental property on the east side this morning. A gas leak." My blood ran cold. I didn't need him to say another word. I knew. "They found 3 bodies," he continued softly. "David, Clara, and the boy. It appears to have been intentional. The windows and doors were sealed from the inside. There was no note." I thanked him and hung up. I stood in my quiet, sunlit apartment, the contract for my new project in my hand. The paper felt solid, real. The news felt like an echo from a distant, terrible dream. There was no sense of victory. No triumphant cheer. There was only a profound, echoing silence. The 2 people who had defined my life, through love, through duty, through hatred, were gone. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my companion since my rebirth was suddenly gone. It was over. That evening I went to my parents' house for dinner as planned. I told them the news. My mother cried, not for David or Clara but for the senseless loss, for the little boy who never had a chance. My father was silent, his hand covering mine. We sat down to eat. The food was delicious, the company warm. We spoke of my new project, of their plans to visit relatives, of ordinary, peaceful things. Life was going on. It was resilient. As we finished the meal, I poured a glass of red wine for each of us. I raised my glass. My parents looked at me, their eyes full of love and a quiet understanding. "This isn't a toast to the dead," I said, my voice clear and steady. "They made their choices and their story is over." I paused, looking at the deep red liquid in my glass. "This is a toast to us. To the living. To a new beginning." We clinked our glasses together. The sound was a clean, bright note in the warm room. It was a sound of closure and a sound of promise. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and full-bodied. It tasted of the present, of a future I had fought for and won. The past was finally, truly behind me. The ghost of Elena that was could rest. The woman I had become was ready to live.